Hello, everyone, and welcome to the PsillyPsyched podcast. Today I'm joined by my dad, James Phillips.
Good morning, everybody. It's nice to meet you, and I hope you enjoyed today's broadcast.
Today we're going to be talking about microdosing, which is taking small doses of mushrooms or whatever psychedelic of your choice is. What would you describe microdosing as?
I think microdosing is just taking small doses of any kind of hallucinogen, but I prefer to use the mushrooms. And one of the things you're trying to do is on a daily basis and over time use small amounts to stay away from like big trips or to stay away from those things that are going to just have a massive effect on your daily life, but instead to use time to incrementally change your behavior.
Yeah, so microdosing has a lot of positive beneficial effects. One of which is organization, because uh, psilocybin wants to organize you and it wants to have you do tasks that you might, normally be procrastinating. So that's one of the positive benefits of it. I find an increase in creativity and ideas. What would you say some effects are for you?
Yeah, I think it kind of goes to those three levels of your kind of your spiritual soul that you've talked about before. I mean, on a survival level, I've noticed that one of the things that happens is I'll start doing tasks that make my body stronger. So it's much easier for me to work out on a daily basis. If I don't do a workout or I don't work on my body and do the kinds of eating that I'm supposed to, the things that just make me healthier, I'll notice it'll just kind of come up to me that I need to do it, and I'll feel a need to do those kinds of daily tasks. The other place that it really is, even in relationships, I'll start noticing in my relationships where things aren't feeling kind of right, and I need to make up something that happened in a relationship. I need to go out there and do something in order to make that relationship a little healthier. And then on a spiritual level, it's just really nice because you begin to see your daily world in spiritual terms, and sometimes that even bleeds into your kind of work and your relationships at work and just getting tasks done at work where you're just building a future life by the daily incremental tasks. And the mushrooms really focus your attention in the areas that are important to you.
Yeah, and so I mean, I see there's certain noticeable effects that I actually see when I'm microdosing. Like, on day, one of the things I said the other day was there's a difference between day one of microdosing and day 30 of microdosing, because I think over time the psilocybin it starts to build up in your system almost. So you'll start seeing little faces in the carpet, but nothing that's too much to handle. But you really start being on a more spiritual plane of thinking. You're a little bit above the physical world and more into that ruach state of emotions and connection with the world. I think in a more deeper way.
Yeah, I agree. I think I like the way you put it, where you're just a little bit above the normal state that you'd be in. I've actually gone through the 30-day mark. I've gone through the 90-day mark, 6 month mark, and it really is different. After about 30 days, it's actually not that big of a difference. I think it actually moves a little bit in. It goes back to one of your earlier videos, which I would suggest everybody watch, but it goes back to, I think after 30 days, you're much more in the survival place where you're fixing that survival consciousness. After about 3 months, you're in that ruach place where you're fixing your kind of your emotional state, and I think the final level is that after that 3 month period, you begin to move to more of a daily spiritual place. And on each one of those places, you're going to see that in the survival level, you'll see kind of a spiritual response to your everyday activities. When you get to that next level, which is the Ruach, you'll start feeling and seeing things on that emotional plane. And then when you get to the past that 90-day mark, past that 6 month mark, you're just going to be in a whole different perspective of your life. Things are going to be easier, less anxiety. It just takes you to just a different way of looking at things.
Yeah, and so I'm actually about to take a break from microdosing because I've done it for about 30 days, and I do want to. It has a lot of benefits for me, and I'm planning on going back to it. But I'm just going to take a short break just to sort of refresh my mind to the full physical world. And then, when I think I'm ready again, I'm going to go back to, being more in touch with the spiritual world, because you can go in and out of it sometimes and take breaks. There's a real benefit to sometimes being strictly in the physical world, and I think there's also huge benefits to, exploring the spiritual world as well.
I agree. I think that one of the things you have to be really careful of anytime you're using any kind of psychedelic or anything is that you don't want to make it something where it begins to change your life in a way that you don't want to change. And so it goes back to an idea of intent or ought or decision making. You always want to be in control of your experience, even if you're doing microdosing, if you're doing those kind of experiences. And so if you're in a place where you're not liking something that's happening, you have an easy choice every time, and the choice is to stop. I've done it over a 7 day period. Like I said, I've done it in much longer periods, and there's always a place at which I just want to back off and get away for a little bit and just go back to, being in the everyday world without having to, kind of walk through that spiritual place. So and there's a concept in mysticism that talks about this, and it's an idea which is called teshuva or return. So there's an idea that you go into a spiritual place, but you always want to return to the physical world. You always want to return to that place of pure everyday reality, because you want to remain rooted in who you are, but then you want to use your spirituality to change over time. So you've got to balance who you are and what you're doing. And so if you're ever feeling a check at all, just stop. It's easy.
Yeah, I think there are huge benefits to it, but you definitely want to be in control of it, and you're always in control of it as long as you let yourself be in control of it. Never give up your control of what you can experience, because my belief is that you're a part of God and that you are God in a lot of ways. And with that power, you get to control your different experiences and what you want to experience and see. So just do whatever you think works for you, and just don't allow yourself to go into a bad place when you're doing any sort of psychedelics. But especially with microdosing, just you're on a spiritual plane, and I think there's a lot of just benefits to being on the a spiritual plane of thinking, and I just think I get all these creative ideas when I'm microdosing. Shrooms just inspire creativity to me, and they it seems to enhance colors, and just I think it's helped me a lot with my videos, because it helps me just see the world in a different way, and it kind of changes my thinking in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it's just a much different experience than when you do, big trips with a lot of shrooms, and you go to a place where you're experiencing the shrooms as being something that's bringing you a big kind of world breaking experience that takes you to another place where you have these huge epiphanies that you end up having to deal with. You see sacred geometry, and you begin to you know have a connection to nature, and you're just part of infinity. All these great big ideas are out there. The microdosing does kind of touch those areas, but it doesn't in a way where you're in a partnership with the psilocybin experience, or you're in a partnership with the mushrooms, and kind of having a day-to-day experience. And the difference, though, is that really is a place where you're allowed to make your choice of whether that's something you want every day, because it's so easy to get into that daily experience with the shrooms. It's also very easy to get out of that experience, and sometimes you just want to be yourself. You don't want to be connected to everything around you. You want to take a break, you want to take a breather, and you want to just reevaluate yourself and kind of process the length of that experience. So I think, without going on too long, in those big experiences, those 8 hour or 12 hour experiences with the shrooms where you use a lot of them, the next day or the next couple days, you're going to be processing what happened to me. With the microdosing, you process it while you're still in the experience at a lower level. And so at some point, you may, after an extended period of time, want to say, okay, I'm getting away from this. I'm backing off, and I'm gonna now just be myself for a little bit without being connected to everything all the time.
And another thing I was mentioning, which is a benefit, I think, is, and we filmed this podcast a couple because of audio stuff we've had to redo. But one of the things I mentioned when in one of our previous filmings was when you take just by taking and eating a bit of the mushrooms, I mean, tiny portions, is a spiritual act in and of itself. Because I find even, and this is when I'm taking large portions of mushrooms, or when I'm taking small portions, it's a there's a spiritual feeling in the taste. Not necessarily a is it delicious or anything of that means, but there's a spiritual feeling I get from even eating them. And so taking small portions of it is almost, you're acknowledging the spiritual world and kind of immersing yourself in it in a certain way. So your thinking is going to be more spiritual just from the act of taking, a small portion.
Yeah, it's really interesting you say that because one of the things that the Mazatepec Indians and the shamans that use this, and there's many religions out there that recognize that the shrooms and the psilocybin mushrooms are a type of sacrament. They're like a holy communion, and so when you approach it like that you're somehow ingesting something that is a higher self, a sacrament or a ritualistic, lots of religions have like a ritualistic bread or a ritualistic this or a ritualistic that. Well, the shrooms can be treated the same way, where you're opening yourself to the idea of ritual, you're opening yourself up to mysticism, and you're opening yourself up to religion, but you're doing it on a level where you're saying that this act of doing this every day is almost a doorway into that place today. It's a doorway into my relationship with God. And that's something that if you bring that into a religion, it's almost like a prayer. It's almost like it's a sacrament. It's all these different ideas where you're saying, I'm opening myself up to that mystical world, and I'm going to be part of it today.
And here's another thing I asked you in the previous recording. This is a new, probably our best one yet. Can you tell me, how do you experience things like anger, or typical things that seem to hold you down in the physical world on that survival level? How do those things feel when you're microdosing?
Well, in the mystical tradition, there's this idea of walking on matter. It's the idea of that as you begin to mystically walk in the world, you start elevating yourself in a way that you're above those everyday emotions or those everyday troubles that people go through. And it's not that you change in your look to the world. Like nobody would know that I'm microdosing. Nobody around me knows, even in my behavior, that I've done something different. But inside, when it comes to things like anxiety, depression, worries, all those different things that you deal with on a daily basis, they seem to be less important somehow. It's not that you don't know that they're there, but what happens is you begin to understand that my actions, the things that I'm doing daily, my connection with that holy world, that mystical world, that I'm able to change my behavior, but I'm able to create a world. I'm able to live in a world where it's of my choosing. It's of my da'at. And so rather than worry about your finances every day and be upset about what happened with your girlfriend, or be upset about what happened with a business decision or whatever it is that you're doing, you begin to look at time as though, where am I going to be at in a year from now? And I know that I'm going to have a structured life, and I'm going to be part of what is organic around me. I'm going to be part of the world that is this cycle of things and this infinity of things. And I'm going to do the daily tasks which are going to change me and change my world. And as you do those tasks every day, and as you spend your days in the spiritual place, you begin to find that the things actually do change, and your anxiety goes down, your ability to deal with problems goes, it goes into a place where you're really able to deal with things, and you're just not as stressed about being in conflict with the world. It's almost as though you start learning how to make the world and its actions work for you. And I've just found over time that it my world is looks more like what I want it to look like than it did before I started microdosing.
And I just want to actually add on to one of those points because I this is a thought I've had a lot, um, which is a better idea of what my future looks like. For instance, when I've started going to the gym and microdosing while I've gone to the gym, I don't really think about what do I look like now? Why am I not muscular enough? I'm not strong enough. I think about 5 years in the future. Well, what am I going to look like then when I've been doing this every day for 5 years and I kept going? And that's one of the huge motivators, I think, is thinking about what I'm going to look like in the future. And, even now, I always struggled a little bit with, okay, what am I going to be when I'm older? What's my life going to look like? What kind of man am I going to be? And now, with a lot of the microdosing, it gives me a clear vision of what that looks like and a belief that I can, go out and achieve that anything is achievable.
I want to talk about that a little bit because one of the things that you're talking about that in your video, one of the things that you do when you talk about the 5 levels of the soul or the 5 levels of consciousness. And so there are teachers out there that talk about those 5 levels. I mean, you're very supported in the spiritual world, and the mystics talk about those 5 levels. And so, but one of the things that you have to understand, it's not a progression where you go from being somebody that lives in a world of survival, lives in a world of emotion, lives in a world, then elevates to a world of the patterns and the mental place, and then world, goes to a world of connectivity in, as far as in that spiritual world, and then finally goes to the place of the unknown. What you're trying to do is you're trying to live on all the worlds and all the consciousnesses at once. And that's one thing that you're trying to do even when you microdose. You don't want to just be on the survival level and then, blip up to now I'm in the emotional level, or blip up now I'm into the mental level, or blip up now I'm on the spiritual plane, and blip up now I'm in, I'm elevating all the time in infinity. What the goal is long term is, as you begin to microdose, you want to begin to have, a relationship to a spiritual relationship in that survival plane, but then you want to elevate to the emotional plane, and also at the same time keep your foot and your consciousness in the door of the survival. So you want the two things to be happening at once. You want to merge your band of consciousness from one level to another, and you take the two and you make them one. And you do the same thing once you get into that next mental, emotional. You want to put them all together so you begin to live a more expanded life. And that may sound like some kind of higher goal that's impossible to achieve, and something that would not be something you could do. But when you start microdosing, it becomes a daily walk in more than one way of looking at the world. You're taking those different levels and you're using them in your everyday life. And so it allows you to do something where you're able to, on one hand, say for a workout, you're able to work out in the moment and do the tasks that you need to do in the moment, while still at the same time be able to focus on what is going to happen in the future, and be able to keep that line of intention and thought and decision making, and kind of bridge them all together as you go forward. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's what it feels like when you do it.
Yeah, and I think also one of the earlier mistakes I made when I was first trying to start microdosing is I would sometimes take a bit of above a microdose level, and you want to make sure that you're taking. When we talk microdose, we're talking a lot of times micro, like put it into a grinder and grind it out and take a tiny little piece. And even me, sometimes I take probably a bit above what a normal microdose level is. So you can take it to where you won't see faces, you won't even notice a change for a while. It's just a change in behavior.
Right. I think subtle may be the word. I mean, I
Yeah.
take a subtle amount. I take a very small pinch on a daily basis that really doesn't change my day. I might notice just for a minute that I just can feel that I've moved to a different place. But I'm not spending my day in a psilocybin haze. I'm spending my day and it seems to be normal, but there's just this little creep from that spiritual place that is part of my daily life. And if you're taking it to the point that you're really in another plane and you're going to you're tripping, then you're taking too much. That's not what we're talking about when we're talking about microdosing.
And can you tell me a little bit about, because I actually haven't really experienced this. This is a bit of your experience, more somebody who's more experienced than me in some of these areas. What it's like to microdose and then take, have been microdosing for a month and then take a large portion of mushrooms, going to that, taking a trip where you're planning on going to the spirit plane, going to a higher level of thinking. What it's like having microdose leading up to that. What's the experience like?
It's actually funny because in all the positivity I'm talking about microdosing, when I microdose, I'm actually a little more cautious with using larger trips of psilocybin. I don't know why, but it's almost as though the mushrooms inside of me are kind of like making me cautious about doing big trips because when I've done big trips and I've been microdosing, they're big trips. So what happens is that first off, if I've been microdosing for a while and I do a larger amount of mushrooms, I go into the mushroom place. I go up through those levels of spirituality where I'm beginning to see things and having very large experience within usually minutes, like within about 10 to 15 minutes, rather than waiting the normal hour, hour and a half, and then it slowly comes on. And then eventually you get to that place and you go, oh man, I finally hear. It comes on fast. And not only does it come on fast, but it's usually a big, big experience. So if people are looking for that, that's kind of, you're like, oh man, that sounds great. I'll be able to get there on a faster level. But the microdosing itself is going to hold you back a little bit from wanting to do as many of those things. And maybe it's just because, as human beings, we only have so much ability to process the spiritual world. We are physical creatures in the physical world. And if we are taking ourselves to that spirit plane, we have to do it with intention and we have to know what we're doing. And I sometimes think that I do less of the bigger trips over time when I'm microdosing because of the fact that they just come on so hard, so fast. And then I spend time after that trying to process that trip, process what happened on that big trip while I'm still in a microdosing state. And so it's just a lot of spiritual stuff to deal with when you're kind of in that place. I would almost caution people. You kind of for the most part, I only do one or the other. So, I mean, I will do those trips every once in a while, but I'm not doing them on a regular basis where I'm doing big trips when I'm microdosing.
Which is basically the idea of not wanting to break your shell, right? Not wanting to break your spiritual shell.
Right. So, I mean, there's a lot of mystical thought that one of the things that we are, and you can have your own belief on this, but that mystical people or people that are out there living on the spirit plane, that what they're doing is they're taking light and a kind of spiritual light and they're holding it inside of you. And when you are, taking microdosing or you're doing larger trips, what you're doing is you're opening yourself up to a plane that's not normally there for you, but you're also getting a source of energy, a source of light, a source of relationship with God that comes into you. But if you do it so much that you lose your personality, you lose your self in that experience, it's hard to recover from. And so the more that you do this stuff, the harder it is to go back over and over again and hold on to who you are. But the point of this journey is to remain who you are, but to do that as a spiritual mystic or a spiritual speaking human being.
Yeah, and so I think that's a really good place where we can kind of end this off, because I think that kind of really goes over what microdosing is all about, which is uh, being a more mystical person, but not breaking your shell, because you don't always have to go. It can be just as enlightening to take smaller doses than to take such a big trip to where you maybe hurt yourself, or you have to process it for a few weeks. So don't be afraid to just take lower doses. It doesn't make you less of a mystical person. It actually can make you more of a mystical person. So that's what we're going to end off here today. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time on the Silly Psych podcast.
Thank you.
Bye bye.